I found out my neighbor had built a luxury whiskey cellar underneath my legal farm access road 3 days after I got home from knee surgery. And the crazy part is, he genuinely thought I was the one being unreasonable. I remember standing there with a cane in one hand, pain meds still messing with my head, staring at imported stonework and decorative lanterns where my combine tractor was supposed to pass through, thinking, there is no way somebody can be this arrogant by accident. Some people move to the countryside because they love the quiet. Some move there because they think owning land means they get to rewrite reality around them. My name's Wade Mercer, and for almost 30 years I've run an apple orchard outside of Yakima Valley, Washington. Nothing glamorous about it either. Real farming. Frost alarms at 4 in the morning, diesel smoke in cold air, arguing with irrigation pumps that break at the worst possible time. My father started the place back in the 70s after coming home from working logging jobs up north, and when he bought the property, part of the agreement included a permanent easement cutting across the neighboring parcel so equipment could reach the back orchards. It wasn't optional. Without that route, harvest season turns into a logistical nightmare. The easement was 140 feet long, graveled, legally recorded since 1978, and rated for heavy agricultural equipment. Everybody around there knew it. UPS drivers knew it. Utility crews knew it. Hell, even deer hunters knew not to park on it during harvest season unless they wanted a very unpleasant conversation with me before sunrise. For years, the neighboring property belonged to an older couple named Ron and Elise. Quiet people. We'd exchange pies during Christmas and complain about coyotes stealing chickens every spring. Never had a single issue. Then they passed away within about 18 months of each other, and the property got sold to a guy named Graham Holloway and his wife Celeste. Now, you ever meet somebody who smiles too hard? That was Graham. First time I saw him, he was standing beside a black Range Rover wearing spotless boots that had clearly never touched mud in their entire existence. He introduced himself like he was running for office. "Beautiful land you got here," he said, looking around like he already owned mine too. I told him thanks, welcomed him to the area, and pointed out the easement just so there wouldn't be confusion later. "Harvest traffic gets pretty heavy through there around September," I said, "sometimes before daylight." He nodded real casually. "No problem at all. We love the agricultural charm." Agricultural charm. That should have been my warning sign right there. Over the next few months, the place transformed into something out of a luxury real estate commercial. Landscaping crews every week. Imported olive trees that absolutely should not survive Washington winters. Outdoor fireplaces. Stone pathways. Massive glass patio overlooking the valley. At one point, they had a guy installing speakers hidden inside fake rocks so music could play through the garden. Meanwhile, I was scheduling a knee replacement because 28 years of climbing tractors and hauling crates had basically turned my right leg into loose hardware. The surgery itself went fine, but recovery was rougher than I expected. I stayed with my sister in Spokane for several weeks because I couldn't move around the orchard safely yet. During that time, Graham texted me twice asking random questions about property lines and drainage access. Nothing alarming, at least not then. When I finally got home, I remember it was one of those gray Washington mornings where the sky feels low enough to touch. I pulled into my driveway, unloaded my bag slowly, then decided to walk the easement route just to loosen my knee up a little. About halfway down, I stopped cold. The gravel road was gone. In its place were decorative pavers, little garden lights, and rows of trimmed lavender bushes running along both sides like the entrance to a winery tasting resort. At first, I honestly thought maybe I'd wandered too far onto their side by mistake, but then I saw the old survey marker near the fence line. Nope, that was my access road. And then I noticed something else, metal ventilation grates built directly into the ground beneath the pathway. I stood there for a second trying to process it, and that's when Celeste walked out onto their patio, holding a wine glass like we were all in some Napa Valley commercial. "Oh good," she called out cheerfully. "You're finally back. Graham wanted to talk to you about the road redesign." Road redesign. That phrase still makes my eye twitch. I asked her what was underneath the easement, and her smile tightened just enough for me to know she already understood this was a problem. Then Graham appeared behind her, hands in his pockets, relaxed as could be. And that's where things really started going sideways. Graham walked toward me smiling like we were about to discuss barbecue recipes instead of whatever insanity he'd buried under my equipment road. "Wade," Good timing, he said. Come take a look at this thing. It's unbelievable. Now, I was tired, my knee hurt like hell, and I already had that feeling in my gut farmers get right before expensive problems appear, but curiosity got the better of me. So I followed him across the stone path toward what looked like a steel cellar door hidden behind decorative shrubs. The second he opened it, cold air rolled out carrying that smell of oak barrels and expensive liquor. The staircase led underground into this massive custom-built whiskey cellar. Brick arches, soft amber lighting, polished wood racks lining the walls. It looked less like a storage room and more like a millionaire's private club. I had a crew from Seattle do it, Graham said proudly. Climate-controlled, vibration-insulated, imported stone from Italy. I just stared at him. Then I looked up. Right above us was the easement. My easement. You built this underneath the equipment road? I asked. He nodded, still smiling. Pretty incredible use of dead space, right? I actually laughed for a second because my brain refused to accept somebody could be this reckless on purpose. Graham, I said, my apple harvester weighs 14 tons loaded. His expression shifted slightly, but not enough. Well, the contractor said normal vehicle traffic wouldn't be an issue. Normal vehicle traffic? I said, buddy, during harvest I drive machines across there heavy enough to flatten a pickup truck. Celeste stepped in then, arms crossed. Surely there's another route to your back orchard. That sentence irritated me more than I expected. People who've never farmed think land works like suburban neighborhoods. Just take another street. Make a little detour, no big deal. But orchards are laid out with irrigation systems, grading, turning radius for equipment, drainage channels. You don't casually reroute harvest operations because somebody wanted an underground cocktail lounge. I told them the easement was legally protected and specifically designated for heavy agricultural machinery. Graham's smile faded completely after that. Well, he said slowly, we already invested close to 200 grand into this project. I remember leaning on my cane looking at him thinking, and somehow you believe that becomes my problem? I went home angry, but underneath the anger was something else too, disbelief. Because deep down I still thought reasonable people eventually return to reality once lawyers get involved. That assumption cost me months of peace. The next morning I called my attorney, Dennis Holbrook. Dennis was in his 70s, suspenders every day, talked like he'd personally argued with Abraham Lincoln at some point in history. He handled water disputes, easements, land fights, basically every flavor of rural warfare imaginable. I explained the situation and there was this long silence on the phone. Then he said, please tell me you took pictures before they cover anything else up. By noon he was at my property reviewing the easement records. We stood there together while he looked over the ventilation grates. Finally he muttered, well, this is spectacularly stupid. That made me feel slightly better. Dennis confirmed exactly what I already knew. The easement didn't just protect surface access. It protected functional access, meaning the route had to safely support the equipment historically using it. If their underground structure couldn't handle legal agricultural loads, then it was interfering with the easement itself. In simpler terms, they built a luxury cave underneath a road designed for industrial farm machinery. Dennis sent a formal demand letter giving them 10 business days to remove the structure or reinforce it to certified agricultural load standards approved by my engineer. That should have ended it. Instead, Graham hired a law firm from Bellevue full of expensive people who probably used the word artisan unironically. Their response basically argued that since the surface path technically still existed, the underground construction didn't violate my access rights. They even included architectural renderings showing reinforced concrete options that supposedly could support heavier loads. But here's the thing they didn't understand about farmers. Harvest doesn't pause while rich people negotiate aesthetics. September was getting closer. Crews would be arriving soon. Equipment schedules were already booked months in advance. If I lost access to those back orchards during peak harvest, I'd lose hundreds of thousands in fruit. Dennis filed for emergency injunctive relief. That's when things got personal. One evening, Graham drove over while I was repairing drip lines near the barn. He stepped out wearing loafers that immediately sank into mud, which honestly improved my mood a little. I think this has gotten unnecessarily hostile, he said. I kept working. He watched me for a minute, then lowered his voice. Look, Celeste loves that cellar. We've hosted investors there. Important people. Tearing it out would be humiliating. There it was. Not practicality. Not misunderstanding. Pride. I asked him one simple question. Did you know about the easement before construction started? He hesitated half a second too long, then said, our architect believed it was outdated. Outdated. Like legal property rights expire because somebody with a turtleneck says the vibes have changed. I remember setting my wrench down and looking him dead in the eye. My father hauled fruit across that road before you were shaving. I told him quietly. That easement fed my family for 48 years. You built a whiskey bunker under it because you thought orchard land was scenery. His face hardened instantly. You farmers act like nobody else should be allowed to improve property around here. And there it was, the real resentment underneath everything. To him, we were obstacles. Dirt people. Locals standing in the way of turning the valley into a luxury postcard. After that conversation, the friendliness disappeared completely. Surveyors started showing up near fence lines. Noise complaints got filed against my equipment before dawn, even though harvest exemptions protected us legally. Somebody anonymously reported one of my pesticide tanks for inspection despite it being fully compliant. Petty stuff. Calculated stuff. The kind designed to exhaust you slowly. Meanwhile, Graham doubled down on the cellar. Started hosting whiskey tastings down there every weekend. Luxury SUVs lined the driveway, while my lawyers fought to keep my equipment route usable. At one point, one of his guests actually asked if my orchard was part of the aesthetic. I nearly drove my tractor into the Columbia River after hearing that sentence. But the worst moment came about 6 weeks later. Dennis hired a structural engineer named Carla Nguyen to inspect the site. She ran ground penetration scans and nearly lost her mind when she saw the construction depth. Turns out portions of the cellar ceiling sat barely 4 feet beneath the easement surface. 4 feet. One loaded harvester crossing at the wrong moisture condition, and that entire ceiling could pancake into a room full of people drinking 12-year bourbon. When Carla explained that to the court during preliminary hearings, even the judge looked alarmed. Still, Graham refused to back down, because by then, this wasn't about a cellar anymore. It was about ego. And people with enough money often mistake ego for immunity right up until reality introduces itself with paperwork and diesel engines. By the time the final hearing rolled around, harvest season was breathing down my neck and the entire valley had started talking about the feud. Small towns are funny that way. People pretend not to gossip, then somehow the cashier at the feed store already knows your business before you do. I walked into court wearing my good denim jacket because Dennis said juries trusted farmers who looked like farmers, though this case didn't even make it that far. Graham showed up in a tailored charcoal suit with 2 attorneys beside him carrying enough paperwork to start their own library. And honestly, for a brief second, I questioned myself. Not legally, morally, because tearing out that cellar was going to cost a fortune. Maybe more than a fortune. People had worked on it for months. Craftsmen, electricians, masons. Part of me wondered if there was some compromise buried under all the anger. Then Graham testified. That feeling disappeared real fast. His attorney argued the cellar increased neighboring property values and that modern engineering solutions could adapt the easement for shared use. Then Graham took the stand and said something I still remember word for word. He said, agricultural practices need to evolve alongside luxury development. Luxury development. Like my orchard was some outdated inconvenience standing in the way of wealthy people discovering wine culture. Judge Holloway, no relation, thankfully, leaned back in his chair for a long moment after hearing that. Then he asked Graham a question so simple it practically sliced the courtroom in half. Did you or did you not knowingly construct a private structure beneath a legally protected agricultural easement? Graham tried to dance around it. That was a mistake. Judges hate dancing. By the end of the hearing, the ruling came down hard. The court ordered full removal of every underground structure interfering with the easement within 14 days. If compliance failed, I was authorized to restore the easement myself and seek reimbursement for all related costs. Dennis didn't even smile when we walked outside. He just adjusted his suspenders and said, that man's about to make the most expensive, stubborn decision of his life. And he did. 14 days came and went. Nothing happened. No contractors. No excavation permits. No demolition crews. Instead, Graham hosted another whiskey event 3 nights before the deadline expired. String lights glowing across the patio, jazz music floating through the orchard, While people laughed over imported cocktails sitting on top of a structure a judge had already declared illegal. That night, I stood on my porch listening to distant music drifting across the valley and realized something uncomfortable. People like Graham spend so much time winning socially, financially, professionally, they eventually stop believing consequences are real. They think consequences are for other people. The next morning, I called Dennis and said, "Let's finish it." Day 15 started at 6:30 sharp. Fog sat low over the orchard when the excavation crew rolled in. 3 diesel trucks, a tracked excavator, 2 dump trailers. Carla, the engineer, arrived with inspection binders tucked under one arm, and Dennis showed up carrying coffee like we were attending a church fundraiser instead of legally dismantling a millionaire's underground fantasy lounge. Per court order, sheriff deputies were already present to supervise. I remember the exact moment Graham came outside. He was still wearing slippers. For one beautiful second, he just stood there staring at the excavator like his brain physically could not process what reality looked like without lawyers buffering it first. Then he started yelling, "You can't do this." Dennis handed one deputy the court paperwork without even looking up. The excavation operator, an old contractor named Bert Ellison, simply asked me, "You want the clean removal or the fast one?" I looked over at the cellar entrance, the imported stone, the polished doors, the landscaping that had replaced my father's gravel road. Then I said, "Restore the easement." That was all Bert needed. The first bucket strike tore through the decorative pathway like it was cardboard. Celeste screamed. Graham charged forward until deputies stopped him near the patio stairs. And once excavation started, everything unraveled fast. Turns out luxury whiskey cellars are not designed to survive backhoes peeling open the earth above them. By noon, the ventilation system was exposed. By mid-afternoon, portions of the ceiling had collapsed inward. Workers carefully removed racks of whiskey bottles, while structural crews documented every stage for liability records. At one point, Bert climbed out of the excavator, wiped dirt off his gloves, and looked down into the broken cellar. "You know," he said casually, "this actually was kind of pretty." Then he fired the machine back up and tore through the western wall. 18 hours later, it was over. The underground rooms were gone. The soil was compacted and reinforced. Fresh gravel covered the restored easement before sunrise the next morning. And for the first time in nearly a year, my equipment route was usable again. Graham sued me 2 weeks later anyway. Of course he did. He demanded compensation for structural destruction, landscaping damage, lost whiskey inventory, emotional distress. Honestly, I think if his espresso machine had malfunctioned that month, he probably would have added that too. The judge dismissed almost all of it before lunch. Worse for Graham, the court ordered him to reimburse my engineering assessments, restoration costs, legal fees, and additional soil stabilization testing caused by the unauthorized excavation. Last number I heard floated somewhere around 240 grand. Funny thing is, I don't actually hate the man. I think Graham genuinely believed money insulated him from older things, local history, land agreements, community rules, people whose families had worked that valley long before he arrived. He saw the orchard as background scenery for a lifestyle he purchased. But rural communities don't work like private resorts. Out here, land remembers things. Roads remember things. Agreements matter because eventually somebody's livelihood depends on them. A month after everything ended, I drove my harvester across that restored easement just before sunrise. Gravel crunching under 14 tons of machinery, cold air coming through the cab window, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something as simple as a dirt road could turn into a war over pride. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if Graham had apologized that first day. Maybe we could have found another solution before the lawyers and courts and excavators got involved. Or maybe men like that only understand consequences once the ground literally collapses underneath them. But I'll leave that question to you. Was I right to enforce the easement exactly as the court ordered? Or should I have found a compromise after all that money had already been spent? Let me know in the comments, because even now around here, people still argue about it over coffee. And if you enjoy real stories about property wars, legal revenge, and small-town conflicts that spiral completely out of control, hit subscribe. Because trust me, this valley has plenty more stories.